Hi folks, it's Thinking Slow here. We wanted to give you a quick update of some information that came out of Ukraine that it's quite important, but it's almost 100% guaranteed that you won't have seen this on mainstream media, and that is the unofficial, I guess, response to European overtures for a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. This was the initial response that we'll look at. And then before doing that, I just wanted to say that we have the Patreon page and Tippy up and running now. So thank you to those that have joined us on Patreon. The main point really is that we actually want to go on the front foot really and try and do something about this one world government that we're sliding into. I think for us, the main objective is to replace people in positions of power who have decided that there are no constitutional constraints to what they're doing, and they've decided to implement this dystopian great reset on the people. And until those people are removed democratically and peacefully, there's no way of stopping this process. So we have a number of initiatives that we've started that we'd really like for some support on, and would very much like to see people join us on Patreon. So let's move to Ukraine now. So this was quite literally the response from the presidential advisor, Mr. Arestovich. And I think people have been following this channel. You will know that we flagged this guy up pretty early on as being a bit of a danger. So although he comes across very calmly and intelligently because he's an actor, I think here in this clip of him is where you get to see his true colors. So he is responding now to various overtures, and we'll look at one specific one coming from the West to Ukraine to say, listen, it's time to think about peace, and maybe that peace will involve ceding some territory in eastern Ukraine, which is majority ethnic Russian. And I can't read out on this channel exactly what he said, but I think you can get with the asterisks is what's being said. Go F yourselves, you F heads, with these proposals, F here, and then this gesture you can see on the screen. So this is really the true colors of this guy, and for us it's not a huge surprise, but I think what is surprising is, what was this a response to? And there's been a number of sort of peace related overtures coming from Europe, but also quite specifically there was a call from Henry Kissinger's speech at the World Economic Forum. And this was a recording, and essentially what he said here is that I suggested, I being him, that Ukraine should remain neutral as a bridge between Europe and Russia, and that it should not be in NATO. So that all of a sudden is something that seems common sense, but it's the deep state, as we've covered in other videos, through Rand corporations and the warmonger, Mr. Stoltenberg, have not been doing that. They've been pushing to include Ukraine into NATO as a way to destabilize Russia. So it's quite surprising to have someone so high up, Dr. Kissinger, in the sort of deep state machinery, saying that I did not recommend that, and I said, on the contrary, Ukraine should remain neutral, which. But even more importantly, he goes on to say, within the next 2 months, there should be sort of peace negotiations which involve returning to a sort of ex-ante position, which means before the war started. So in many ways, I think he's saying that Crimea's gone, and maybe the de facto split of Donetsk and Luhansk becomes a de jure split from Ukraine, and being a Russian sort of strategic partner through some kind of bilateral agreements between those regions and Russia. But it's very, very surprising because he's completely pulling the rug from underneath the sort of deep state. I mean, although he's also now, when he's talking about peace, isolating the complete lunatics like Anders Osland who are talking about bombing Russia, he's also isolating the less crazy but equally dangerous group of the deep state, which is calling for regime change and destabilizing Russia. So here is expressly saying, 2 months, which is a pretty specific time frame, and talking about a peace agreement with some outlines of what that might be. And he's also raising the issue, because this is the business he's in, of geopolitics, of we're going to create a permanent shift of Russia to China. And from his perspective as a geo-global strategist, that is very undesirable. So in many ways, this is surprising. And if someone wants to put in the comments why there's such a disconnect between what he said in this speech and what we can see the deep state doing, I'd be interested to hear. And I think this was one of the main speeches that prompted Arestovich's expletive-ridden performance on that Ukrainian TV show. And I think that's a short-sighted thing for him to do, because even if indirectly Arestovich is attacking the sort of deep state players, that's probably not such a good idea. And we can finish up with that, one comment on that. So, as I said, we warned people early on about this guy. And interestingly, if you look back at our film, we actually said that in one of his interviews, pre all of these hostilities, that he actually said, there will be a war between Russia and Ukraine based on NATO membership for Ukraine, and it's actually something he wanted. He said, on the contrary, that's fine, bring it on, basically. So this is a very dangerous individual, and he is a classic example of this corrupt government that you have, a strategic advisor who's also a blogger and an actor at the same time. And on that point, this is specifically what President Putin said in a phone call with the president of Finland. Situation in Ukraine. In particular, Vladimir Putin shared his opinion of the state of the negotiating process between Russian and Ukrainian representatives. This process has been practically put on hold by Kiev, which does not show any interest in a serious and constructive dialogue. You have to take a view whether you believe that or not, but I think that's probably a reasonable assessment. And I think once the mask slips, looking at the behavior of Arestovich and probably, I'm guessing, others within that sort of acting, blogging, stroke presidential advisor circle, it's very possible that this is the truth, that it's very difficult to negotiate because they simply won't negotiate from the Ukrainian side. And then, therefore, the sort of downstream problems from that of distributing wheat, etc., for us, it's pretty clear where the blame lies for that. If you're trying to deal with another party that just won't get into any dialogue, so this, the problem of wheat prices for us is clearly with the side that won't enter into dialogue, which is the Ukrainian side. And then just finishing up, one other very surprising bit of information coming out of the US was an essay from the New York Times from the 31st of May. I haven't been able to read it because it's behind a firewall, but just the title alone is kind of mind-blowing, to be honest, after being subjected to months of endless propaganda. The US deserves much of the blame, and this is about the war in Ukraine. I mean, we'd certainly agree with that headline, but the fact that it's openly announced when the entire state propaganda stroke brainwashing machinery is focused on this sort of good guys versus bad guys narrative, that it's 100% Russia and 0% Ukraine, it's unusual to see an essay which undermines that. And actually it's an essay which makes sense. The US have played a big role in getting this conflict where it is. And as we've said in the other videos, this is all about shades of grey. I don't think there's anybody who's innocent as the driven snow in this situation. And that's something that needs to be recognized in order to move to some kind of peace negotiations. So the infantile propaganda pushed out by Foreign Secretary Truss has no place in reality. It's just ludicrous, to be honest. And I think what we're seeing now is chinks within the system, that the narrative is collapsing internally. So I think Dr. Kissinger's points kind of undermined a lot of what's going on. And when you see essays like this in mainstream media, you know there's going to be a shift, that they can't keep going with this fairy tale good guys versus bad guys. So hope you found that interesting. Please join us on Patreon, because this is going to be a long multi-year process, and to be involved in that we really need all hands on deck, and we'd very much appreciate the support. Okay, thank you. Bye. Stay free.